The ink hadn't even dried on the divorce papers before he started laughing. He thought he had just pulled off the deal of the century, discarding his useless housewife to protect his precious, failing startup. He mocked her cheap clothes. He ridiculed her silence. He handed her a $10 bill for cab fare and walked out with his mistress, convinced he was the king of the world. But he didn't check the last name on the birth certificate she kept hidden in her safe. He didn't know that the woman he just discarded wasn't unemployed. She was the sole heiress to the St. James banking empire, a shadow dynasty worth $3 trillion. And that signature? It wasn't her defeat. It was his death warrant. The air inside the conference room on the 42nd floor of the generic downtown high-rise was stale, smelling faintly of lemon polish and aggressive cologne. Brandon Hart sat at the head of the mahogany table, checking his reflection in the screen of his phone. He adjusted the knot of his silk tie, a smug grin plastered across his face. Across from him sat Elena. She looked small in the oversized leather chair. Her grey cardigan was slightly frayed at the cuffs, and her hair was pulled back in a messy, practical bun. She stared at the document in front of her, the divorce settlement, with eyes that betrayed absolutely nothing. "Come on, Ellie," Brandon said, drumming his fingers on the table. "I don't have all day. I have a lunch meeting at Nobu in an hour. Big investors, real money. Something you wouldn't understand." Mr. Henderson, Brandon's lawyer, cleared his throat. He was a weaselly man with a receding hairline who charged Brandon $400 an hour to tell him exactly what he wanted to hear. "Mrs. Hart," Henderson said, his voice dripping with condescension. "As we've discussed, the terms are generous. Brandon is allowing you to keep the 2018 Honda Civic. He is also absolving you of any liability regarding Hart Tech Solutions. In exchange, you waive all rights to alimony and any future earnings of the company." Elena looked up, her gaze drifting from the lawyer to her husband. "Generous," she repeated softly. Her voice was calm, contrasting with the nervous energy radiating from Brandon. "It's more than you deserve," Brandon snapped, leaning forward. "Let's be real, Elena. What have you contributed in 3 years? You sit at home, you paint, you cook dinner. You're a dead weight. Hart Tech is about to explode. We're talking IPO talks with Goldman Sachs next quarter. I can't have a housewife dragging down my valuation." He wasn't actually talking to Goldman Sachs. His company was bleeding cash, and he was desperate to offload her before his creditors came knocking, fearing that a spouse might claim half of the remaining liquidity. He needed to cut her loose to marry Tiffany, whose father owned a mid-tier logistics firm Brandon hoped to leverage for a bailout. "You really believe that?" Elena said. "It wasn't a question." "I know it," Brandon scoffed. "Look at you. You're plain. You're boring. You have no ambition. Tiffany, she understands the game. She's a partner. You? You're a charity case I picked up at that coffee shop 3 years ago." The door to the conference room opened without a knock. Tiffany Cole walked in. She was wearing a red dress that was too tight for a legal proceeding and carrying a limited edition Birkin bag that Eleanor instantly recognized as a fake. The stitching on the handle was wrong. "Is it done yet, baby?" Tiffany whined, ignoring Eleanor entirely. She draped herself over Brandon's shoulder, leaving a smudge of lipstick on his expensive suit jacket. "Almost," Brandon said, kissing her cheek. He looked back at Eleanor with eyes cold as ice. "Sign it, Eleanor. Don't make me embarrass you by listing out your lack of assets in court. Take the car, take your clothes, and go back to whatever trailer park mindset you came from." Elena looked at the pen. It was a cheap ballpoint. She reached into her purse, a battered leather tote, and pulled out her own pen. It was a sleek, black lacquer fountain pen with gold trim. To Brandon, it looked like just a pen. To anyone in the inner circle of global finance, the subtle crest of the double eagle on the cap identified it as a custom commission from the House of Visconti, given only to board members of the St. James Global Group. She uncapped it. The nib glided silently across the paper. Elena Hart. She signed it with a flourish that seemed out of character for the timid housewife he thought he knew. "There," Elena said, capping the pen and placing it back in her bag. "I waive everything. Heart-Tech is entirely yours, Brandon, as are its debts." Brandon snatched the papers away before she could change her mind. He didn't catch the last part of her sentence. He was too busy staring at the signature, feeling the weight of his freedom. Finally, Brandon exhaled, standing up. "Henderson, file this immediately. Today. I want the decree absolute by the end of the week." He turned to Tiffany, grabbing her waist. "Champagne at lunch, babe. We're free." They started walking toward the door. Just as his hand touched the brass handle, Brandon paused and looked back at Eleanor, who was still sitting, calmly collecting her things. "Oh, almost forgot," Brandon said. He pulled his wallet out and fished for a 20, but only found a $10 bill. He crumpled it and tossed it onto the mahogany table. It slid across and stopped near her hand. "For the gas. Don't say I never gave you anything." Tiffany giggled, a sharp, cruel sound. "Come on, Brandon. She probably takes the bus." The heavy door slammed shut behind them, leaving silence in the room. Elena sat there for a long minute. The humiliation of the past 3 years, the constant belittling, the late nights he claimed were work, while smelling of Tiffany's perfume, the way he treated the waitstaff at restaurants. It all washed over her. She had stayed because she wanted to believe in love. She wanted to believe that if she lived a simple life, away from the suffocating pressure of her father's empire, she would find someone who loved her, not the trillions attached to her name. She had failed, but in her failure she had found clarity. Elena stood up. She didn't pick up the $10 bill. She walked to the window and looked down at the street 42 stories below. She saw Brandon and Tiffany exit the building. They were laughing, getting into Brandon's leased Porsche Cayenne. Elena pulled her phone from her pocket. It wasn't the cracked iPhone 8 she used around Brandon. This was a satellite-encrypted device with a biometric lock. She pressed her thumb to the screen and dialed a single number. "Yes, madame." A deep, gravelly voice answered on the first ring. "It's done, Arthur," Elena said, her voice shifting. Gone was the timid housewife. In her place was the tone of a woman who had been trained since birth to negotiate sovereign debt treaties. "Did he sign the waiver of claim regarding the trust?" Arthur asked. "He did. He thinks he won." "Shall I initiate the protocol?" "Not yet," Elena said, watching the Porsche merge into traffic. "Let him have his lunch. Let him have his week." "But Arthur." "Yes, madame. The St. James annual charity gala is in 2 weeks. I want Heart-Tech Solutions to receive an invitation, a VIP table." There was a pause on the line, followed by a knowing chuckle. "That is cruel, madame. He will think he has been scouted." "Exactly," Elena said. "I want him to walk into the lion's den willingly. Have the car meet me at the back exit. I'm done with the Honda. The Phantom is 2 minutes away." Elena hung up. She looked at the conference room one last time. She left the $10 bill on the table, a pathetic monument to Brandon's arrogance. She walked out the door, her heels clicking a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like a war drum. The transition from Eleanor Hart, the downtrodden housewife, to Eleanor St. James, the iron orchid of the banking world, was not instantaneous. It was a ritual. The moment she stepped out of the service entrance of the office building, the air changed. A phantom fate. Extended wheelbase, painted in a deep midnight blue that looked black in the shadow, idled at the curb. A chauffeur in a slate-grey uniform stood by the open rear door. He wasn't just a driver, he was ex-SS, a man named Graves, who had been her personal detail since she was 12. "Welcome back, Miss St. James," Graves said. He didn't use the name Hart. He never had. "Take me to the penthouse, Graves, and call the team. I need a full debriefing on the Asian markets and the portfolio status of the Western tech sector within the hour." Understood. As the heavy door thudded shut, sealing her in a cocoon of silence and hand-stitched leather, Elena exhaled. She reached up and pulled the pins from her hair, letting the golden-brown waves cascade over her shoulders. She opened the center console, retrieved a wet wipe, and scrubbed her face. Off came the cheap drugstore foundation she wore to look average. Underneath, her skin glowed with the health that comes from a lifetime of the best dermatologists and nutritionists money could buy. She removed the frayed cardigan and tossed it into the waste bin built into the door. Underneath, she wore a simple white silk camisole. It was minimalist, but the fabric cost more than Brandon's entire wardrobe. The car glided through the city. They weren't heading to the suburbs where she and Brandon had rented a drafty townhouse. They were heading to the Obsidian Tower, a residential skyscraper where the top 3 floors belonged to the St. James family. When she arrived, a team was waiting. It wasn't a salon team, it was a war council. Arthur Pendleton, the family's chief legal counsel and her godfather, stood by the panoramic window overlooking the city. He was an older man, sharp as a tack, wearing a suit that cost as much as a mid-sized sedan. "Elena," he said, nodding respectfully. "Your father sends his regards from Zurich. He is pleased." "Pleased I'm divorced, or pleased I'm back to work?" Elena asked, kicking off her scuffed flats and stepping into a pair of plush slippers a maid instantly provided. "Both. He never liked Brandon. He called him a shoe-shine boy with a complex." Elena poured herself a glass of sparkling water. "He wasn't wrong. But I had to know, Arthur. I had to know if I could be loved for just me." "And the experiment yielded its data," Arthur said clinically. "Now, we manage the fallout. Brandon believes his company is on the verge of a breakthrough. The reality is, Heart Tech is leveraged to the hilt. He owes $3 million to Silicon Valley Bank, another $2 million to private equity sharks, and he's behind on his payroll taxes." Elena walked to the massive touchscreen wall in the living room. She swiped a finger, and Heart Tech's financials appeared. It was a sea of red. "Who holds the private equity debt?" Elena asked. "A shell company called Obsidian Ventures." Arthur smiled. Elena raised an eyebrow. "One of ours? We acquired the debt package this morning from a nervous investor in Singapore. Technically, Elena, you are his primary creditor. You could foreclose on him tomorrow." "No," Elena said, her eyes narrowing. "Foreclosure is too impersonal. It's just business. This needs to be personal. He needs to understand the scale of his mistake. He mocked my poverty, Arthur. He told me I had no ambition." She zoomed in on the debt maturity date. "The debt matures in 20 days. What is the date of the gala?" 14 days from now." "Perfect," Elena said. "For the next 2 weeks, I want Heart Tech to feel successful. Have our shadow brokers puff up his stock. Let a few rumors fly about a buyout. Feed his ego. I want him flying so high that when he falls, the impact shatters him. And the invitation? Send it. The golden ticket. Table 4, near the front but not the center. I want him to have a good view of the stage." Arthur tapped a note on his tablet. Consider it done. And for you? The press hasn't seen Elena St. James in 3 years. They think you've been in a Swiss sanitarium or studying in an ashram in India. Elena turned to the window. She could see the city lights flickering on. Somewhere out there, Brandon was toasting with champagne, celebrating his liberation from the boring wife. "Tell the press nothing," Elena said. "Let the gala be the unveiling. I need a dress, Arthur. I need the dress. Get me the creative director of Alexander McQueen on the phone, and tell the vault manager to prepare the Romanov emeralds." Arthur paused. "The Romanovs? That is a statement of war, Elena." "It is," she replied. "He wanted a trophy wife? I'm going to show him what a queen looks like." Meanwhile, at a high-end steakhouse downtown, Brandon Hart was drunk on success and a $300 bottle of Cabernet. "To us!" Tiffany squealed, clinking her glass against his, "and to getting rid of the dead weight." "God, I feel light," Brandon laughed, loosening his tie. "You have no idea, Tiff. Watching her sign that paper, she didn't even fight. She just rolled over, pathetic. She has no spine. She's a loser, babe. That's why she's in the past." Brandon's phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. "Ugh, check it. It might be the investors," Tiffany said. Brandon picked up the phone. He squinted at the screen. His eyes widened. "No way," he whispered. "What? What is it?" "It's an email from the St. James Global Group." Tiffany gasped. "The Trillionaire family? The ones who own, like, half the world?" "The same," Brandon stammered. He read the email aloud, his voice trembling with excitement. "Dear Mr. Hart, the Board of Directors of St. James Global cordially invites you to the annual Winter Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We have been monitoring Harttech's progress with great interest." Brandon dropped the phone on the table. He looked at Tiffany, his face flushed with triumph. "They've been watching me," he said, awestruck. "St. James Global has been watching me. They want to acquire me, Tiffany. This is it. This is the unicorn deal." "We're going to be rich," Tiffany screamed, drawing the attention of other diners. "Rich?" Brandon smirked. "Babe, we're going to be royalty. See? I told you Elena was holding me back. The minute I cut her loose, the universe rewards me." He raised his glass. "To the gala. I'm going to walk in there and sell this company for 9 figures." Little did he know, he wasn't walking into a sale. He was walking into an execution. The week leading up to the St. James Gala was a study in contrasts. While Elena was orchestrating a symphony of corporate warfare from her penthouse, Brandon was frantically trying to glue feathers onto a sinking ship. Brandon sat in his office, his feet up on the desk. He was currently ignoring 3 urgent voicemails from his suppliers about unpaid invoices. In his mind, those bills were already paid. The St. James deal was a foregone conclusion. He just needed to look the part. "Babe," Tiffany whined from the couch in the corner of his office. She was scrolling through her phone. "If we're going to this gala, I can't wear off the rack. I need something designer, like real designer." "Get whatever you want," Brandon said, waving his hand dismissively. "Put it on the corporate card." The corporate card was declined at Starbucks this morning, Tiffany pouted. Brandon frowned. He sat up and logged into the Harttech banking portal. Insufficient funds. He cursed. He had forgotten about the automatic withdrawal for the server leases. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he had sworn never to call again, a hard money lender named Rico. "Rico, it's Hart," Brandon said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I need 50 grand. Cash. Today." "Yes, I know the interest rate is 20% weekly. It doesn't matter. I have a liquidity event happening in 2 weeks. I'll pay you back double." He hung up, sweating slightly, but the grin returned quickly. $50,000. That was enough to lease a tuxedo, buy Tiffany a gown that screamed money, and rent a limousine for the night. It was an investment. You had to spend money to make money. 2 hours later, Brandon and Tiffany were in the most expensive boutique in the city's fashion district. Tiffany was trying on a neon pink dress covered in sequins that looked like a disco ball had exploded. "It's distinct," the sales associate said, struggling to keep a straight face. "It's loud," Brandon corrected, nodding. "I want everyone to look at us when we walk in. We need to make a statement." "Oh, you will certainly make a statement," the associate murmured. Brandon selected a tuxedo for himself. It was a velvet maroon jacket with black lapels. He thought it made him look like a European count. In reality, it made him look like a valet driver at a themed casino. "We're going to own that room," Brandon told Tiffany as he swiped his freshly funded debit card. "Elena is probably at home right now, clipping coupons for frozen dinners. And look at us." 5 miles away, in the climate-controlled dressing suite of the St. James penthouse, the atmosphere was hushed and reverent. Elena stood on a pedestal in front of a 3-way mirror. 3 seamstresses moved around her like silent ghosts, pinning and tucking. "The fabric is a custom weave," said Henri, the creative director of the fashion house, who had flown in from Milan that morning just for this fitting. "Midnight silk, threaded with crushed diamond dust. Under normal light, it looks black. Under the camera flashes, it will shimmer like the night sky." Elena looked at her reflection. The dress was a masterpiece. It was strapless, with a plunging neckline that was daring but elegant, structured with a corset that gave her an hourglass silhouette. It had a high slit up the left leg, designed to show power, not just skin. "It's perfect, Henri," Elena said. "And now," Arthur's voice came from the doorway, "the pièce de résistance." He walked in, followed by 2 armed guards carrying a heavy steel case. They set it on the velvet ottoman and unlocked it. Inside lay the Romanov emeralds. The necklace was heavy, a cascading river of diamonds leading to a central emerald the size of a pigeon's egg. It had belonged to Russian royalty, then vanished into the St. James vaults in the 1920s. It hadn't been worn in public for 50 years. Elena reached out and touched the cold stone. "Is it too much?" she asked. For Elena Hart, the housewife. "Yes," Arthur said, "but for the chairwoman of the St. James banking group. It is necessary armor. You are re-entering the world, Elena. You must remind them that you are not just a participant in the economy. You are the economy." Elena nodded. She allowed the guards to fasten the necklace around her neck. The weight of it settled on her collarbone, cold and heavy. It felt like responsibility. It felt like power. "Arthur," she said, still looking at the mirror. "What is the status of Heart Tech?" Arthur checked his tablet. "Brandon took a high-interest predatory loan 3 hours ago. He spent $45,000 on clothing and transport within the last 60 minutes. He is currently technically insolvent." "Does he know who the keynote speaker is?" "No." We kept the program vague. The invitation says, "The chairperson of St. James Global." He assumes it's your father. "Good," Elena smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Let him enjoy his velvet suit. He's going to need the confidence when I take everything he has." The Metropolitan Museum of Art had been transformed. The massive steps leading up to the entrance were draped in a red carpet, so plush it felt like walking on memory foam. Hundreds of photographers were penned behind velvet ropes, their camera flashes creating a strobe light effect that turned the night into day. Limousines, Bentleys and Rolls-Royces formed a line stretching 3 blocks. This was the most exclusive event of the decade. The price of admission was not a ticket. It was a net worth of at least 9 figures, or a personal invitation from the St. James family. Brandon's rented stretch Hummer, a vehicle that was fashionable in 2005 but considered tacky by the current elite, pulled up to the curb. "Showtime," Brandon said, checking his teeth in the rearview mirror. He took a swig from a flask he'd concealed in his jacket pocket to calm his nerves. The driver opened the door. Brandon stepped out, extending a hand to Tiffany. Tiffany emerged in her neon pink sequined dress. The fabric bunched unflatteringly at the waist, and the color clashed violently with the elegant red carpet. Brandon waved at the photographers. He expected a roar of shouts. He expected them to scream, "Mr. Hart, over here!" Instead, the photographers lowered their cameras. A few checked their phones. One began cleaning his lens. "Who is that?" one photographer muttered loud enough for Brandon to hear. "Nobody. Some tech startup guy. Save your film for the Rockefellers," another replied. Brandon's smile faltered. He grabbed Tiffany's arm a little too tightly. "Ignore them. They're just working-class hacks. They don't know who the players are." They walked up the stairs. At the top, a team of event coordinators with clipboards stood guard. "Name?" a woman asked without looking up. "Brandon Hart, CEO of Hart Tech," Brandon announced, puffing out his chest. "I have a personal invitation from the board." The woman ran her finger down a list. She paused. She looked at her earpiece, then looked up at Brandon with a strange expression, a mix of pity and amusement. "Ah, yes. Mr. Hart, you are at table 88. "Table 88? Brandon frowned. "I was told I'd be near the front." "Table 88 is excellent, sir. Please proceed." She ushered them in. As they walked away, Brandon didn't see the woman tap her earpiece and whisper, "The target is inside." The great hall of the museum was breathtaking. The ceiling was lit with projection mapping to look like a moving galaxy. A 50-piece orchestra played soft, intricate waltzes in the corner. The air smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and white truffles. Brandon and Tiffany navigated through the crowd. Brandon tried to stop a few people he recognized from magazine covers. "Mr. Musk, Brandon Hart, Hart Tech," he said, reaching out a hand to a passing billionaire. The man didn't even break stride. He looked through Brandon as if he were made of glass and continued a conversation with a Saudi prince. "Rude," Tiffany huffed. "Whatever. Let's find our table." They wandered through the sea of tuxedos and gowns until they found table 88. It wasn't in the back, as Brandon feared. It was actually in a very prominent position, near the stage, but off to the side. It offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the podium. "See," Brandon said, relaxing. "VIP. I told you. They want me close to the action." They sat down. The table was set with gold-rimmed china and crystal glasses. But strangely, they were the only 2 people at the 10-top table. "Where is everyone else?" Tiffany asked, looking around. "Probably networking," Brandon said. He picked up the menu. "Caviar service. Nice." As the room began to fill, the lights dimmed slightly. A hush fell over the crowd. The orchestra stopped playing. A man walked onto the stage. It was Arthur Pendleton. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur's voice boomed through the speakers. "Distinguished guests, welcome to the annual St. James Gala." Applause rippled through the room. Brandon clapped loudly, trying to look enthusiastic. "Tonight is a special night," Arthur continued. "For decades, the St. James Group has been guided by the steady hand of Patriarch Robert St. James. But as times change, so must leadership." A murmur went through the crowd. This was big news, a succession announcement. "Robert has decided to step down as chairman," Arthur said. "And tonight, Doctor, we are here to introduce you to the new face of the St. James Empire, the sole heiress to the trust, the new chairwoman." Brandon leaned forward, gripping the tablecloth. "This is it," he whispered to Tiffany. "I need to make eye contact with her the second she walks out." "Please welcome," Arthur announced, gesturing to the grand staircase behind him. "Madame Eleanor St. James." The spotlight swung to the top of the stairs. Brandon froze. At the top of the stairs stood a woman who looked like a goddess carved from moonlight. The midnight blue dress shimmered with every breath she took. The Romanov emeralds blazed around her neck, green fire against her pale skin. Her hair was loose, wild waves framing a face of striking beauty. But it was the face. Brandon blinked. He rubbed his eyes. "That," Tiffany whispered, her fork clanging onto her plate. "That looks like—" "No," Brandon stammered. A cold sweat broke out instantly on his forehead. "No, it's not possible. It's a coincidence. A look-alike." The woman began to descend the stairs. She didn't walk. She glided. Every step was deliberate. The entire room, filled with the most powerful people on earth, held its breath. She reached the bottom of the stairs and walked to the podium. She looked out at the sea of faces. She commanded the room without saying a word. Her gaze swept across the crowd. It moved past the senators, past the oil tycoons, past the tech giants, and then it stopped. She locked eyes with Brandon Hart at table 88. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply stared at him with a look of absolute, terrifying recognition. "Good evening," she said into the microphone. Her voice was unmistakable. It was the voice that used to ask him if he wanted coffee in the morning. It was the voice he had told to shut up 1,000 times. "It's Eleanor," Brandon whispered, the blood draining from his face until he was ghost white. "My wife is Eleanor St. James." Tiffany looked at Brandon, then at the woman on stage, and then back at Brandon. "You divorced a billionaire!" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the silence near their table. Elena heard it, or she seemed to, because a small, razor-sharp smile curled the corner of her lips. "Tonight," Elena said, her eyes never leaving Brandon's terrified face, "we are going to talk about the future. And we are going to talk about accountability." Brandon felt the room spinning. The champagne in his stomach turned to acid. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't work. He was trapped in the spotlight of his own making, and the executioner had just taken the stage. The silence in the great hall was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. Elena stood at the podium, her hands resting lightly on the wood, the massive Romanov emerald pulsing with green fire under the stage lights. "Value," Elena began, her voice amplified, clear and resonant. "In banking, we are taught that value is a number. It is a calculation of assets versus liabilities. But in life, value is harder to quantify. Sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones we overlook, the ones we leave in the corner, the ones we deem useless." She paused. Her eyes, magnified on the giant projection screens behind her, flicked unmistakably toward table 88. Brandon shrank in his seat. He felt like an ant under a magnifying glass. The other guests at nearby tables, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, foreign dignitaries, were beginning to turn their heads. They followed Elena's gaze. They saw the sweating man in the cheap velvet tuxedo and the woman in the garish pink dress. "For the past 3 years," Elena continued, "I stepped away from this world. I lived a simple life. I wanted to understand the economy from the ground up. I wanted to see how the ambitious men of this world operate when they think no one of consequence is watching." She smiled, but it was a smile that promised violence. "I learned that some men build, and some men merely leech. They take the support, the love, and the labor of those around them, and they call it their own success. They believe that discarding people is a business strategy. She's talking about you, Tiffany hissed, leaning away from Brandon as if he were radioactive. Oh my God, everyone knows she's talking about you. Shut up, Brandon whispered, his voice cracking. She still loves me. She's hurt. I can fix this. I just need to get her alone. We were married for 3 years, Tiff. That counts for something. I can explain. Explain what? Tiffany snapped. That you dumped a trillionaire for a girl whose dad owns a trucking company? On stage, Elena gestured to the screen behind her. The galaxy projection faded, replaced by a stark, jagged red line graphing a downward trend. Tonight, St. James Global is announcing a new acquisition strategy, Elena said. We are purging the market of toxic assets. We are calling in debts from companies that lack integrity. We are cleaning house. She leaned into the microphone. And we are starting immediately. Elena stepped back from the podium. The applause was thunderous, though confused. People clapped because they were afraid not to. As Eleanor walked off stage, she didn't go backstage. She walked down the stairs, straight into the crowd. A phalanx of security guards, led by Graves, formed a V-shape around her. She cut through the room like an icebreaker ship. She was heading straight for table 88. She's coming here, Brandon panicked. He stood up, knocking over his chair. We have to go. Tiffany, move! Sit down, Brandon. A voice boomed behind him. Brandon turned. It was Arthur Pendleton, the lawyer he had dismissed as a nobody during the divorce proceedings. But Arthur wasn't wearing a cheap suit now. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than Brandon's car, and he was flanked by 2 large men who looked like they ate concrete for breakfast. Mr. Pendleton? Brandon stammered. I have a meeting. An emergency. You have no meetings, Arthur said coldly. Ms. St. James wishes to speak with you. You will wait. Brandon sank back into his chair. He was trapped. The room seemed to warp around him. He watched as his ex-wife approached. She stopped at tables to accept handshakes from senators and oligarchs, but her trajectory was inevitable. She was the predator. He was the prey. Finally, she arrived at table 88. The circle of elites around them widened, sensing the blood in the water. Elena stopped 3 feet from the table. She looked down at Brandon, who was trembling. She looked at Tiffany, who was desperately trying to make herself invisible. Hello, Brandon, Elena said. Her voice was conversational, light. It was terrifying. Elena! Ellie! Brandon choked out. He tried to summon his usual charm, the smirk that had worked on her 1,000 times. You look incredible. I always knew you had this in you. I knew if I pushed you, you'd shine. The crowd murmured. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Elena laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Is that what you were doing? Pushing me? I thought you were divorcing me because I was, what was the phrase? A dead weight. I was stressed, Brandon pleaded, standing up and reaching for her hand. Graves stepped forward instantly, blocking him. Brandon recoiled. Business was tough, Elena. You know that. I did it to protect you. I didn't want my creditors coming after you. Elena raised an eyebrow. Protect me? That's interesting, because according to my files, you tried to force me to take your debt. You mocked my clothes. You gave me $10 for a cab. She reached into her glittering clutch purse. She pulled out a crumpled $10 bill. She dropped it onto the table. It landed in the untouched caviar. I'm returning your investment, Elena said. With interest. Elena, please, Brandon begged, sweat dripping down his nose. We can work this out. I'm the CEO of Heart Tech. We're about to go IPO. We can be a power couple. Just Let's go somewhere private. Elena checked her diamond-encrusted watch. Oh, Brandon, she said softly. You're not the CEO of Heart Tech. Brandon blinked. What? Check your phone. Brandon fumbled for his phone in his pocket. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it once before retrieving it. The screen was lit up with notifications. Dozens of them. Email, 8:02 p.m. Notice of default, Silicon Valley Bank. Email, 8:03 p.m. Immediate call on loan, Obsidian Ventures. Text, 8:04 p.m. Server access revoked due to non-payment. News alert, 8:05 p.m. SEC investigates Heart Tech Solutions for fraud allegations. What is this? Brandon whispered, scrolling frantically. Obsidian Ventures. They called the loan? They can't do that. The term was 20 days. Read the fine print on the contract you signed without reading, Brandon, Elena said. Clause 4, Section B. The lender reserves the right to call the full principal immediately upon any material change in the borrower's marital status or reputation. Brandon looked up, his eyes wide with horror. You own Obsidian Ventures. I do, Elena said. I bought your debt this morning, and I'm calling it in. You owe me $5 million, payable immediately. I don't have $5 million, Brandon screamed. You know I don't. Then I'm afraid we have to seize collateral, Elena said calmly. She signaled to Arthur. Arthur tapped his tablet. It's done. We've executed the lien. Heart Tech Solutions is now a wholly owned subsidiary of St. James Global. We have dissolved the board. You are fired, Mr. Hart. You can't fire me. It's my company. It was your company, Elena corrected. Now it's a tax write-off. I plan to strip it for parts. The office lease, cancelled. The IP, worthless, but we'll keep it. The staff? I've already offered the talented engineers jobs at St. James. They accepted 20 minutes ago. Brandon turned to Tiffany. Tiff, call your dad. I need a bridge loan. Just $1 million. I can fight this in court. Tiffany stood up. She picked up her fake Birkin bag. She looked at Brandon with pure disgust. My dad isn't going to lend money to a guy who just got fired by the richest woman in the world, Tiffany spat. And I'm not going to date a guy who wears a rental tuxedo. Tiffany, don't call me, she said. She turned to Eleanor. Mrs. St. James, I didn't know. He told me you were crazy. He lied to me. Elena looked at Tiffany coldly. You walked into my marriage knowing exactly what you were doing. You're not a victim, Tiffany. You're just a bad bet. Tiffany flushed red and fled the table, the sound of her heels echoing as she ran toward the exit. Brandon was alone. The room was staring. The waiters were watching. The orchestra had stopped playing. He looked at Elena. The power dynamic had shifted so completely it gave him vertigo. He was on his knees, metaphorically and nearly physically, while she towered above him, draped in diamonds and vengeance. Why? Brandon croaked, tears of frustration and rage welling in his eyes. Why go to all this trouble? If you were this rich, why did you pretend? Why did you let me struggle with the startup for 3 years? We could have been happy. I didn't pretend to be poor, Brandon, Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. I pretended to be normal. I wanted to see if you could love a woman, not a bank account. I wanted to see if you had honor. She leaned in closer. And when the business struggled, I was the one who anonymously paid for the server costs the first year. I was the one who convinced your first investor to take a chance on you. I propped you up because I believed in you. Brandon's jaw dropped. You did that? Yes. And how did you repay me? Elena's eyes hardened into steel. You cheated on me. You called me useless. You tried to leave me with nothing. She straightened up and addressed the security guards. Mr. Hart is trespassing, Elena announced. He has no business affiliation with St. James Global, and he has no assets to justify his presence at this gala. Graves, the ex-SAS driver, stepped forward. He placed a heavy hand on Brandon's shoulder. "Time to go, sir," Graves rumbled. "No, you can't do this," Brandon shouted, trying to shake him off. "I'm Brandon Hart. I'm an innovator." "You," Elena said, turning her back on him, "are a bad memory." Graves and another guard hoisted Brandon by his arms. They dragged him away from the table. Brandon kicked and screamed, creating a scene that would be trending on Twitter within minutes. "Elena! Elena, I'm sorry. Take me back. I love you. I've always loved you." Brandon's screams faded as he was hauled toward the exit. Elena didn't look back. She picked up a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Arthur stepped up beside her. "That was efficient," he noted. "His credit rating is destroyed. His company is gone. His social standing is obliterated. He will likely be facing fraud charges from the SEC for the inflated numbers he showed the investors." "Good," Elena said. She took a sip of the champagne. It tasted crisp and cold. "Are you all right?" Arthur asked gently. Elena looked at the empty chair where Brandon had sat. She looked at the $10 bill still resting in the caviar. "I'm better than all right, Arthur," she said. "I'm solvent." But the night wasn't over. Brandon Hart was a desperate man, and desperate men do dangerous things. As he was thrown out onto the street, humiliated and penniless, he saw the paparazzi. He saw the cameras, and his narcissism twisted into something darker. He wouldn't fade away. If he was going down, he was going to make sure everyone knew his version of the truth. He lunged for a reporter's microphone. "She's a fraud!" Brandon screamed into the live news camera. "Elena St. James is a fraud. She stole my company. It's a conspiracy." Inside the gala, Elena's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You think you won, but you have a secret too, don't you, Elena? Does the board know about the child?" Elena froze. The glass of champagne slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. The champagne glass lay in shards on the marble floor, a glittering mess amidst the immaculate gala. Elena stared at the phone screen, the text message burning into her retina. "Does the board know about the child?" Arthur Pendleton stepped in front of her, shielding her from the curious glances of the nearby dignitaries. "Madame, what is it? Is it a threat?" Elena handed him the phone. Her hand was steady, but her eyes were dark. "It's Brandon. He's desperate. He's playing his final card." Arthur read the text and scowled. "The boy. He found out about Leo." "How?" "We buried those records in the Zurich archives. The only people who know are you, me, and your father." "He didn't find the records," Elena realized, her mind racing. "He found the medical bill. 3 years ago, right before we got married, I had a consultation. I left the paperwork in the safe at the townhouse. I thought I threw it away. He must have kept it as insurance." "He thinks he can use the child as leverage," Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. "He thinks if he claims paternity of the St. James heir, he can force a settlement. He can demand custody. He can demand billions." Elena smoothed the silk of her dress. The fear that had momentarily paralyzed her vanished, replaced by a cold, resolute fury. "He thinks the child is his leverage," she said softly. "But he's wrong. The child is his tombstone." "Graves," Elena commanded, speaking into her earpiece. "Where is he?" "He is currently on the museum steps, madam." Graves' voice crackled in her ear. "He has gathered the press. He is shouting about a scandal. The police are holding back, waiting for your order." "Let him speak," Elena said. "Let him dig the hole deep. I'm coming out." Outside, the scene was chaotic. the flashing lights of police cruisers mixed with the strobes of the paparazzi cameras. Brandon Hart stood in the center of the media scrum, his velvet jacket torn at the shoulder, his hair wild. He looked like a mad prophet. "She's a liar!" Brandon screamed into a dozen microphones thrust in his face. "Elena St. James portrays herself as this perfect business goddess, but she's a monster. She hid my son from me. We have a child, a secret heir that she's keeping locked away in Europe." The crowd gasped. The reporters began shouting questions over one another. "Mr. Hart, are you claiming paternity? Is there a St. James heir? Did she kidnap the child?" "Yes," Brandon yelled, his eyes manic. "She deprived a father of his son. I want custody. I want half of everything for the pain and suffering she caused me and my boy. She signed those divorce papers to trick me, to cut me out of my son's life." The heavy bronze doors of the Metropolitan Museum swung open. A hush fell over the chaotic street. Elena walked out. She was flanked by Arthur and 4 security guards. She didn't look like a woman caught in a scandal. She looked like a queen descending to judge a peasant. She walked slowly down the red-carpeted stairs, the Romanov emeralds catching the glare of the news van's floodlights. She stopped 5 steps above Brandon, looking down at him. "You wanted an audience, Brandon," Elena said, her voice amplified by the silence of the crowd. "You have one." Brandon pointed a shaking finger at her. "Tell them, Elena. Tell them about the baby. You can't deny it. I found the ultrasound in the safe. You were pregnant 3 years ago." Elena looked at the cameras. She remained perfectly calm. "It is true," she said clearly. "I have a son. His name is Leo. He is 3 years old." The press erupted in a frenzy. Brandon grinned, a twisted look of victory on his face. He turned to the cameras. "See? See? I'm the father of the heir. That makes me the legal guardian. She can't fire me. She owes me." "You?" Elena asked, a look of genuine confusion crossing her face. "You think you are the father?" "We were married," Brandon shouted. "Of course I'm the father." Elena signaled to Arthur. The lawyer stepped forward, opening a leather folder. He pulled out a single, crisp document. "Mr. Hart," Arthur said, his voice dry and clinical. "Do you recall the premarital medical screening you insisted Eleanor take? You were obsessed with genetic purity. You made her get tested, but you refused to get tested yourself. You claimed you were a prime specimen." "So what?" Brandon snapped. "Elena did get tested," Arthur continued. "But unbeknownst to you, the doctor also ran a test on the sample you provided for the fertility insurance policy you wanted to buy." Elena stepped forward. "You aren't the father, Brandon. You can't be." "Why?" Brandon sneered. "Because you cheated on me?" "No," Elena said, her voice dropping an octave, heavy with pity. "Because you are sterile." The word hung in the cold night air. Brandon froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "It's a condition called azoospermia," Elena explained, broadcasting his medical history to the entire world. "You have never been able to have children. You never will be." That's a lie," Brandon whispered, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. "It is a medical fact," Elena said. "I found out a month before the wedding. I wanted to tell you, but you were so arrogant, so obsessed with your legacy. I knew it would destroy your ego, so I kept your secret." She took a step closer. "But I wanted a family, so I used a donor, an anonymous donor. I carried my son, Leo, while you were busy working late with your secretaries. I gave birth to him while you were on a boys' trip to Vegas that I paid for. I raised him with the help of my father, keeping him safe from a man who would have resented a child that wasn't his." Brandon looked around. The reporters were no longer looking at him with interest. They were looking at him with mockery. He wasn't the father of a trillionaire heir. He was a sterile, failed businessman who had just been publicly emasculated on national television. But the divorce papers, Brandon stammered, grasping at straws. I signed. I didn't read. Yes, Elena said. Let's talk about the papers you signed today. Clause 21. Arthur held up the divorce decree Brandon had signed hours ago. Clause 21, Arthur read aloud. The husband hereby acknowledges that he has no biological issue with the wife, and waives any and all claims, present or future, regarding any dependents in the wife's care, acknowledging he has no legal standing. You signed it, Brandon, Elena said. You signed it because you were too busy looking at Tiffany to read the fine print. You signed away a son you never had, and you signed away your dignity. Brandon fell to his knees on the red carpet. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. His legs simply gave out. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. He had no company. He had no money. He had no legacy. And now, the entire world knew he was a fraud in every sense of the word. Elena turned her back on him. Get him off my property, she said to Graves. Wait, Brandon cried out, tears streaming down his face. Elena, what about me? What am I supposed to do? Elena paused at the top of the stairs. She looked over her shoulder, the emeralds blazing. You're a start-up guy, right, Brandon? She said coldly. Start over. She walked back into the gala, the heavy doors closing with a final, resonant boom. 6 months later. The winter snow was falling softly on the streets of the city. In the warm, golden light of the St. James penthouse, Elena sat on the floor, building a block tower with a toddler who had curly hair and bright, intelligent eyes. Higher, Mama, Leo giggled. Careful, Leo, it requires structural integrity, Elena laughed, placing a block on top. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at it. It was a notification from a business news app. Former tech CEO convicted of fraud. Brandon Hart, formerly of Hart Tech, was sentenced today to 5 years in federal prison for defrauding investors. During the trial, his court-appointed lawyer argued for leniency, citing mental distress, but the judge showed no mercy. Elena swiped the notification away. Mama, who is that? Leo asked, pointing to the screen. Nobody, sweetheart, Elena said, kissing the top of his head. Just a bad investment. She put the phone down and turned back to her son. She had her empire, she had her freedom, and most importantly, she had the one thing Brandon never understood the value of, a future built on love, not greed. Outside, far away in a cold, grey holding cell, Brandon Hart sat on a metal cot. He stared at the wall. He had a pen in his hand, and he was trying to write a letter. But the ink was dry. And that is how the signature of a useless housewife became the most expensive autograph in history. Brandon Hart thought he was signing divorce papers, but he was actually signing his own confession. He lost his company, his reputation, and his freedom, because he underestimated the quiet woman sitting across the table. It's a brutal lesson in humility. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never judge a book or a wife by the cover. You never know who is secretly holding the keys to the kingdom. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate revenge and instant karma, make sure to smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that greed never wins. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We post new dramas every single day. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.